Good morning.
Good morning.
Today we're looking at the middle part of chapter 12. We'll be going from verse 12 to verse 36, and then we'll finish up with 37 and to the end of the chapter next week, as Jesus actually finishes up talking to the crowds and begins transitioning to reaching out and teaching his disciples only. So, for some context, before this, Jesus had raised Lazarus, and there was a lot of buzz and popularity around him. The Pharisees were already dead set against him. They had already decided that he was a blasphemer and needed to die for the good of the nation, quote unquote. And when Jesus came back, his disciples were at first thinking, well, this is way too close to Jerusalem and the headquarters of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Let's go and die with him. They weren't expecting to see Lazarus be raised from the dead, and that made a whole bunch of people place their trust in him and believe, to the point where the rulers of the Jews, the religious leaders, said, all right, well, if so many people are believing him in Jesus because of Lazarus, we'd better kill Lazarus too. And this popularity then comes out as we see Palm Sunday. So we'll pick up on verse 12. The next day, the great crowd that had come for the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel. Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it was written, Do not be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt. At first, his disciples did not understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him. Now the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. Many people, because they had heard that he had performed this sign, went out to meet him. So the Pharisees said to one another, See, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him. Now there were some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the festival. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with the request. Sir, they said, we would like to see Jesus. Philip went to tell Andrew. Andrew and Philip, in turn, told Jesus. Jesus replied, The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life. Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant also will be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven, I have glorified it, and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there and heard it said it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus said, This voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. And I, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself. He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. The crowd spoke up. "We have heard from the law that the Messiah will remain forever. So how can you say, 'The Son of Man must be lifted up'? Who is this Son of Man?" Then Jesus told them, "You are going to have the light just a little while longer. Walk while you have the light, before darkness overtakes you. Whoever walks in the dark does not know where they are going. Believe in the light while you have the light, so that you may become children of light." When he had finished speaking, Jesus left and hid himself from them. Do you have any immediate thoughts or questions from this section?
No, only the comment that I guess John, again, is a little different than the other Gospels.
We're familiar with the synoptics accounting, where it focuses much more on Jesus getting the donkey, while John focuses more on the crowds and their response. It is a different perspective.
Yes.
The first comment to bring out that I asked is in verse 16, we see at first his disciples did not understand all of this. There is some question of, okay, how much did they understand? How much did they not? We know at the very least that the crowds seemingly recognized that this was some kind of significant sign, and his disciples must have as well. But what did they understand? What did they not? They probably didn't understand. It's one of those cases where they understood that Jesus was the Messiah, but what it meant that he was the Messiah, they didn't understand. They didn't expect him to be one who would suffer and die for people's salvation, rather than an earthly king who would give political salvation. And with the verse, it's a case where, okay, they see he's a king seated on a donkey's colt. What exactly that means is probably what they did not understand.
I think the giveaway here is in verse 13, where the crowd shouts, "Blessed is the King of Israel." I think clearly that is, quite clearly, that is an indication that Jesus was an earthly king and not a savior. Is it Zechariah or Malachi, where
Zechariah,
where the word coming on a donkey is included? So if they knew their Bible, which they may have, they knew this was the guy. But you can read those Old Testament prophets and still misinterpret what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
So they were confused. It says at first his disciples did not understand all of this. Well, no, they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, it's very hard for people to grasp exactly how significant this is.
Yeah, and this ties in with the second question, the meaning of the donkey. The obvious one is the point back to Zechariah, where he's referencing the prophet, but what exactly does it mean? Well, as you mentioned, the people, as they're acclaiming him, they're saying, "Blessed is the King of Israel." That's not it's the one that doesn't fit in with all the biblical titles that are said before. Hosanna, it's a common refrain in the Psalms, save us. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That's from the Psalms as well. Blessed is the King of Israel. That's not in the Psalms. That's not the normal way of, that's not in the normal refrain of going up to the temple for Passover. And in the same way, a donkey is not the normal ride for a king. As one commentator stated it, a donkey is an animal of peace. A donkey does not pull a chariot. It pulls a cart. If you're the kind of people who, it's either people like priests or merchants or businessmen who would ride around on donkeys, and versus someone who's a conqueror, well, they're going to have a big, strong war horse. They're going to have speed and power and fierceness. If a king is riding on a donkey, that's sending a message that I'm not coming to you as a conqueror, I am coming to you as basically a man of peace and emissary. It would be much more humble than any king normally would portray himself as.
Jehu did not ride into town on a donkey. No.
No.
He with chariots.
Mm-hmm. And just highlight, as you mentioned, the differences with John, the verse 17 and onwards isn't in the normal gospel, in the synoptic gospels. The first three seem to portray it as one big group that's doing everything, while in John there's a slight difference. The crowd that immediately goes out to welcome him is not other pilgrims. It's not, well, it is other pilgrims, but it's not people who are necessarily coming in at the same time he is, because, as it was mentioned previously, Jesus came in late, so to speak. Most of them were in before they had things set up. They were getting ready for Passover. But these people are already in Jerusalem, and when they hear that Jesus is coming, they go out to meet him. And these are people from the Galilee area, the people who had heard most of his teaching, and the people who had seen what he had done with his miracles and raising Lazarus. So they form kind of a first wave, so to speak, that goes out and acclaims Jesus. And then you get other people who are asking, what's all this about? Who's this guy? Which some of the other Gospels do have. But John expands on that and brings out, once they hear the enthusiasm of this first wave, it almost seems like a second wave goes out. Maybe they're not also waving palm branches and throwing their cloaks, but they are eagerly going out to meet him and see him and find out, okay, what's this guy all about?
Okay, this, to put it in context, this event is happening, the Jewish holiday, the Passover, is going to happen on the Sabbath, Saturday, and this is happening a week earlier.
On Palm Sunday, which it's the day after the Sabbath.
Okay, so this is, there's a crowd in town, probably people from outside the community who are there for Passover.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be some of this crowd.
Yes. That would be people from out of town would make up the first wave.
So these could have been people from as far away as Rome or as close as Bethlehem.
So
just right in wherever.
So the first wave of people, so there would be people from as far away as Rome and Bethlehem and Galilee. Most of the first wave of people who were waving the palm branches would be from Galilee specifically.
Okay.
And then they would spread the word to the people from Rome and Bethlehem and Judea and the rest of the world, and as well, even to some of the Greeks, some of the people who weren't official Jews.
Okay, here's a question. End of chapter, or end of verse 19. So the Pharisees said to one another, "See, this is getting us nowhere." When they say, "This is getting us nowhere," apparently they had a plan going on at that time already to try to get rid of Jesus.
Yes, previous to this, they had already basically passed the sentence of death on him, and we'll see in the end of the section, there were people who were religious leaders who did believe in Jesus, but they didn't speak up because the majority had basically passed the decision. Anyone who is in favor of Jesus is against the Jewish faith. So they were basically carrying out a smear campaign, we might call it, or a campaign of persecution against Jesus, and it didn't seem to be diminishing his popularity. So it's them doubling down on, well, just trying to suppress him isn't working. The only solution is death.
Okay. The Pharisees, we always talk about the Pharisees like these are not necessarily good people because they misunderstand God, but did the Jewish people in Jerusalem, did they have respect for the Pharisees?
Yes.
Okay. They were admired.
If you think, you get pretty close if you think of them in terms of like the priests in the Middle Ages.
Okay.
They're not actual priests. They're not from the line of Levi. Most of those would be Sadducees. But the Pharisees were the teachers. They were the holy people. They were the ones who followed the law much better than anyone else and taught others to do likewise.
My perception is that the Pharisees were people of some wealth, that they were knowledgeable about the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
I perceive that they were that way because they weren't out plowing fields and digging whatever. These guys had some money. They probably had slaves. They could sit around and learn and be taught, or send their children to someone to be taught.
They were academics.
Okay.
It's the priests, pastors, something of a mix between those gets closest to what a Pharisee is. They make their money as teachers, not necessarily teachers of the law. They're slightly different. Those would be the judges, basically. But the Pharisees would be, they're the people that you would go on the Sabbath. There was a decent chance that a Pharisee would be the one to stand up and give the sermon, devotion, whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
And of course, this isn't necessarily just the Pharisees. The Pharisees and Sadducees would be included in trying to kill Jesus, but the Pharisees would kind of be the front line of trying to discredit Jesus, because the Pharisees were the ones that interacted with the people more.
When we talk about the high priest, I think his name is Caiaphas?
Yes.
Okay. The high priest, was he a Levi?
Yes.
Okay. Did the Pharisees and the high priest, the Pharisees were part of it, and I perceive this was part of an elite group, including the Levites, actual priests.
There would be a few. So if you want the overarching, the leaders of the Jews are called the Sanhedrin.
Okay.
The two main parties of the Sanhedrin were the Pharisees and the Sadducees.
Okay.
Most of the Sadducees were the actual priests, the Levites.
Okay, I did not know that.
The Pharisees would be calling them lay people is incorrect, but they do not have priestly blood, but they are teachers of the people. They're leaders of the people.
To be clear, the Sanhedrin and the high priest Caiaphas, they were out to kill Jesus.
Yes.
This was not a splinter group. This was
The Sanhedrin was all of the leading members and the majority of the Pharisees and Sadducees of the Sanhedrin were against Jesus. There were some individuals, as we'll see later, that said, well, Jesus is good. Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus were part of the Sanhedrin, but the majority, kind of led by Caiaphas, the high priest, was against Jesus.
they were out for blood.
Yes. And the final comment, you have a little bit of irony there, because ultimately they're exaggerating. The whole world has gone after him. The whole world, really? I know Jerusalem swells like Sturgis during motorcycle rally week, but it's not the whole world.
Well, I perceive this in two ways. Number one, yes, they were exaggerating. And number two, from their very narrow view of the world, it seemed like it, that was the case to them.
But when you compare the people who are going after him now to the people who will follow after him after his death and resurrection and Pentecost, it is going to be people throughout the world that go after him. So again, they're speaking more truly than they know.
That's an interesting thought.
But on that note of the whole world, we get people outside of the traditional Jewish circles, some Greeks. Now, this is a particularity of language that we don't always follow. If we call someone a Greek today, it means someone from Greece. Back then, Greek was pretty much synonymous with Gentile. So it's not necessarily that these Greeks are all the way from Greece. They might be, but considering that they went to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, it may be a case where they themselves are not too far. It might be a case that they're from the Decapolis, which would be the region on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, from Galilee. So it's pretty much Gentile neighbors.
Okay.
We don't know exactly where they came from, just that they aren't Jews. They are God-fearing Greeks, not proselytes. They didn't receive circumcision to be a legal Jew, but they are interested in the Jewish faith.
Okay, and two, again, maybe to clarify for me, at that time, Greek was the language of the world.
Yes.
It's maybe or would it be Latin?
The Greek would be we call it the lingua franca. If you want to, if you want a list, if you want to communicate with someone from another country, chances are you both speak Greek.
Okay.
Ever since Alexander the Great, pretty much we'd call it the civilized world, they all spoke Greek. Even if they weren't a Greek, if one person was a Jew and the other was a Roman, if they wanted to be able to communicate, chances are they'd be speaking in Greek. Accent, but it's kind of the equivalent of English today. If you're doing trade, chances are you're doing it in English.
The Olympic Games requires the use of the native language of that country and English. Why is that? I don't know, because English is pretty screwed up language.
Because the British Empire spread English throughout the world, so
they said at one time the sun never set on the British Empire.
So just to review, when you're talking to, there's kind of 4 languages that would be used if it was the Roman governors making a decree. They'd do it in Latin. That's kind of the highfalutin language of the empire, and they would have that as the extra one. But most people, if you're doing trade, you'd use Greek. Most of the people of Judea and Galilee, when they're speaking to their friends and family, they'd be speaking Aramaic, which was a leftover from the Babylonian exile. So that's kind of the local language. And then the religious language would be Hebrew. This is something that only the scholars, the Pharisees and Sadducees, would know Hebrew, but you wouldn't expect the fishermen, the people like the disciples, to have more than a passing grasp of it. They would not be able to hold a conversation in Hebrew or necessarily give a speech in Hebrew.
And when Jesus spoke, what language did he speak in?
He'd be speaking in Aramaic most of the time, because he is, as a Jew, speaking to Jews in the common tongue.
Okay. Had he been more scholarly, maybe he might have spoken Hebrew, but he did not.
It's kind of like speaking German nowadays in the Wells. There's a lot of good stuff that's written in German, but you're not going to speak it in a sermon.
Unless you're speaking to a German congregation. And I understand there are some of them still around.
But it's not Jesus would know Hebrew, but he wouldn't be speaking in it. It's not unless you're trying to show off, it's normally not a conversational language at the time.
There was a church in our district, in our circuit, I should say. I don't think it's anymore, but the name of the church was First English. I think that church is closed.
Yeah. Times change, and some languages that important works are written in are lost for the common people. But ultimately, Jesus and the disciples would all know Greek and be able to talk Greek with these men.
So the disciples, the Bible was, as we know it, correct me if I'm wrong, was written in Greek.
The New Testament was written in Greek, yes.
So Peter spoke Greek with
Yes. Just not to get too far off topic, the Galilee was, as was mentioned in the sermon a bit ago, it was Galilee of the Gentiles. It was kind of the major trade area. The fish caught in the Sea of Galilee wouldn't just feed Galilee or Judea, it would people would come throughout the world and shop there, and they'd be talking in Greek. So he would be very familiar with it. Andrew and Philip as well. It's kind of Galilee was a mixed race area, so it's the equivalent of knowing Spanish if you're living in Texas. Because there's a decent chance that you're going to run into people that their first language is Spanish, so it's pretty fair to know it.
If you're in Tucson, Arizona, and you work at a fast food restaurant, and you speak only Spanish, you'll probably be okay.
Mm-hmm.
But if you speak only English, you might not be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't that way 70 years ago.
But the point of them is these Greeks, they show up, they ask to see Jesus, and then they kind of disappear. So that we don't have any mention about Jesus actually meeting with them or talking with them. So why are they so important? Well, it is the interpretation of it, because if you recall, when Jesus sent out his disciples, he sent them out specifically to the Jews. I have sent you out to the lost sheep of Israel, because I tell you, you will not have enough time to reach all these towns and cities before the coming of the Son of Man, which would be his death. So now this is the sign that, okay, there is the leaders of the Jews have rejected him. This is the height of his popularity with the crowds of Jews. This then is the sign that, all right, the next phase of the plan is beginning, and it's ultimately going to be brought in by his death and resurrection. It is the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified, and as Jesus brings out, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. And if it dies, it produces many seeds. So to tie that in with the Greeks, Jesus has been reaching out to the singular nation of the Jews. There have been a few people who came to him for miraculous assistance, a few people interested in him, but now Greeks coming out seeking him not just as a miracle worker, but as a teacher. This is a sign that the gospel is reaching other nations, and the seed is going to multiply, and it's going to be in his death. So far, so good?
Yes.
Then the NIV does a good translation from the Greek is a little ambiguous. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. This translation does a good job of bringing out Jesus isn't actually praying this and then going back. He's bringing it forward as a hypothetical question. Should I ask God to save me? No, this is the plan. And with verse 33, when I am lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself, to show the kind of death he was going to die. Again, we don't have a whole giant cross hanging up there, but we do have the brass cross up at the front. It is the central point of Christianity, that Jesus died for our sins. That's where we go to, the cross of Christ. And The people at the time might not have understood exactly what he meant. It's a case of, well, either he's saying he's going to be crucified or he is going to ascend in some way. Either way, he's not going to be here anymore, which then goes against the expectation of the promise of an eternal kingdom. Because, as mentioned previously, they're expecting an earthly king and an earthly kingdom. And if the kingdom's going to be eternal, then the king should be eternal. And if he's going to be lifted up, that means he's not going to be here on earth. So the Jews are now being confronted with, okay, this isn't how we're expecting it to be. That this isn't what we expect it should be. And that brings up the question of, okay, who is the Son of Man? We've seen Jesus use this term a lot, and from the prophets, we have multiple uses of it. If I'm recalling correctly, it's Amos, where God refers to him as Son of Man, where it's a term of fragility. He's saying, I am God, you are a man, a son of a man. What can you do? But then you have Daniel, where in his visions he sees one who is like a son of man, who is brought up and receives honor and praise and worship. And even though he is human, a son of man, he is also divine. He is God. So these people are asking, okay, you're saying the Son of Man is going to do all this. Who is the Son of Man? It's a term that could be a fancy way of saying myself, but you just said you're going to be lifted up and you're going to leave the world. So, if it's not you, is it someone else? The people put together enough to say that the Son of Man is the Messiah. But now that he's not fitting in, he's making it clear he's not going to be how they expect a king to be. They're asking, okay, Son of Man equals Messiah, but does this Son of Man equal someone else other than you? Jesus doesn't answer them immediately. Rather, as with many of his parables, he answers them in a roundabout way. You're going to have the light only a little while longer. Make use of it. In other words, clear out your ears, listen to what I'm saying. Any other thoughts, questions, or comments?
I always, when I hear the Son of Man, I certainly recognize that Christ is God. On the other hand, I think of this term as implying God's service to the human race in the sacrifice that Christ made.
In this case,
He died for us.
It's one of those cases of where it's a contradiction, because in a way it is, Jesus is both meanings of the Son of Man, where he is fully human, weak and fragile, who is going to suffer and die for us. But he's also the figure of one who is like a Son of Man from Daniel, because he is God. He also receives glory. The Son of Man from Daniel isn't we don't have any explicit reference that points back to it, but many commentators say this is likely in Jesus' mind as he chose this title for himself, where it is, he's showing, yeah, people will hear it and they might think, okay, divine, but there's also, we might call it plausible deniability of the Pharisees are coming against him. You can't put him to death for claiming to be the Son of Man. But there's also the idea that it is a divine title as well. Anything else before we close with prayer? All right. Lord, in your glory and in your coming for us, you suffered, you obeyed the law for us, you suffered for us, and you died for us. As you were lifted up, you have called all nations to yourself, including Gentiles like us. We thank you for your overflowing grace and pray that you constantly be with us as we seek to share this word, this glorious good news with all those that you have placed in our lives and call them to trust in you. In your name we pray. Amen. And do I need to clear the memory card? Because I think it...
Yeah, you